Antipodes, Chapter 26, Part 1. Tiptoe awoke with a start. Something had struck her hard in her back. She attempted to roll over, but was hit again, this time just below her rib cage. With a flap of her wings, she propelled herself out of bed and spun to look at what was hitting her. Unsurprisingly, it was Jigsaw. He was tossing and turning violently in his sleep. The sheets lay in a heap at the foot of the bed, presumably kicked off. Tiptoe didn't know how she hadn't been woken up before, since Jigsaw was thrashing so violently. She approached the bed to try and wake him when she noticed something odd. Even though the lights of the city had only just begun to glow, the interior of the room was bathed with a golden light. She glanced around to the braziers mounted on the walls and saw that they were cold. The light seemed to be emanating from Jigsaw himself. Tiptoe froze, suddenly unsure if waking Jigsaw was the best choice of action. However, after a moment of consideration, she began to inch closer and closer to him.
"Jigsaw?"
she whispered.
"Jigsaw, are you okay?"
Jigsaw didn't respond. He was still thrashing about, threatening to tumble out of bed.
"Jigsaw?"
she called a little louder, unease creeping into her voice. This time, however, Jigsaw seemed to respond. The thrashing became less violent, and the tension seemed to leave his muscles. Tiptoe let out a sigh. Her relief was short-lived. A moment later, Jigsaw began to twitch and writhe uncontrollably. Tiptoe's eyes widened with fright.
"Incendia!"
she shouted, her voice crackling.
"Incendia, get in here! I think Jigsaw's having some kind of seizure!"
She heard a muffled clatter and a sizzling sound, but at that moment, the light atop the massive radio tower burst to life, signaling the start of the morning. Jigsaw stopped twitching, going truly limp this time. The golden lights slowly receded until the room was illuminated only by the light filtering in through the window. Tiptoe approached Jigsaw slowly once more and tentatively nuzzled him.
"Jigsaw, are you all right?"
Jigsaw's eyes flung open, and his horn began to glow with a blue light. This was unlike the light that was normally shown from his horn, however. It was a significantly darker shade of blue. Tiptoe tried to step back, but was horrified to find that Jigsaw's magic was holding her in place. Jigsaw's eyes began to glow, shining with a deep blue light in much the same way that Incendia's eyes glowed when she ignited.
"Jigsaw, what are you doing?"
Tiptoe pleaded.
"Let me down!"
Jigsaw turned to look at her, his eyes unfocused and glossy, iridescent in the light from the window and shining from within. When he opened his mouth, the voice that issued out bore little resemblance to his own. It was deeper, more forceful and dreadfully raspy. It said each word, booming through the bedroom, "You have not seen the shape of things to come." It was then that Incendia burst into the room, a frying pan containing 3 sizzling eggs, floating in an orange haze just behind her. Her mouth fell agape with horror at the scene in the bedroom that was playing out before her. Tiptoe struggling in midair, suspended in a tight band of light projecting from Jigsaw's horn. She dropped the eggs and focused her energies towards the spot in between Jigsaw and Tiptoe. With a sound like a firecracker, they flew apart. Tiptoe caught herself in midair with a flap of her wings, but Jigsaw flew out of bed and smacked into the far wall. The glow instantly disappeared from both his eyes and his horn, and, a moment later, he got shakily to his feet.
"What? Oh God, this is my head! What just happened?"
he asked. Tiptoe galloped up to him and flung herself over his shoulders. The sudden shock nearly threw Jigsaw back onto the floor, but he stumbled and managed to maintain his footing.
"I'm so glad you're okay,"
Tiptoe cried, pulling away from him.
"I thought something awful was happening to you."
I feel like I had just had a statue dropped on me. he said with a shaky smile at Incendia, who was still eyeing him suspiciously.
I'm okay now. You weren't okay when I came in,
she observed, making her way closer to the spot on the bed where Jigsaw had just been and examined it, as if expecting to find some kind of residue.
What happened?
She asked, turning to Tiptoe.
Jigsaw kicked me awake,
Tiptoe said,
and it looked like he was having some kind of seizure. He was also, well, he seemed to be glowing. Then right when morning started, he picked me up and he said, "You have not seen the shape of things to come." Then, well, you came in and did the rest.
I'm so sorry, Tiptoe, Jigsaw said. I didn't do those things. I don't know what came over me.
Well, at any rate, I couldn't sleep well last night,
Incendia said.
So I got up early and made breakfast. We might as well eat. Big day ahead of us.
They all made their way into the main room. As they exited, Jigsaw shot a dark look out the window at the radio tower and muttered, I may have some idea of what came over me. In short order, Incendia had them all settled down at the table. Luckily, she had been able to salvage the eggs that had dropped on the floor of the bedroom. After breakfast, they all felt a little calmer and more level-headed, and some semblance of normalcy had returned.
Where did you learn to cook so well, Incendia?
Jigsaw asked. Incendia felt her heart flutter at his simple compliment, but she managed to keep herself calm.
It wasn't always a life of excitement, Stalingrad, she said. I had time to experiment with my powers here and there, and being a natural stove means I was often the one that had to cook. Eventually, I started just doing it to relax.
Jigsaw nodded, then sighed deeply. We should probably talk about what happened this morning. He felt the mood in the room change instantly. Whatever calm mood had pervaded before was gone. Undeterred, he pressed on. I don't know, but I think it was a warning. Something is going to happen today, and I don't think we have a lot of time to act.
How can you possibly know that, Jigsaw?
Incendia asked.
Because, whatever it was inside me. I can't really explain it, I really think this place is in danger. Well, what's our plan of action?
Tiptoe said, with a sharp look at Incendia, who was still eyeing Jigsaw suspiciously.
We need to sneak into the church and get a closer look at the airship,
Jigsaw said, though he didn't sound entirely sure of himself.
What about the fragment?
Incendia asked.
Shouldn't we collect that while we're at it?
Jigsaw sighed again, got to his feet, and began pacing around the table.
I've been thinking about that, and I just don't know. The fragment's the only thing keeping this place safe. Who knows what would happen if it was taken away? But we can't just sit here and do nothing,
Incendia countered.
After what happened this morning, do you really think that you'll be able to just walk away?
Probably not, Jigsaw conceded.
But let's just get going. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Jigsaw threw on his saddlebags, and they left their cozy home and began to retrace the winding route Jigsaw had taken the previous day. The streets were sparse and more bare than they had ever seen before. Here and there ponies were erecting shops or watering flowers, but they seemed lethargic and listless. In fact, the only ponies who seemed to not be diminished were the Pegasi. Their forms were still clearly visible, silhouetted against the gray of the sky. Eventually they came to a section of the street that had a small wooden barrier erected in it, which stated simply, "Closed for repairs." They took a detour around a large grassy field and ended up walking on a colorfully tiled path that was within touching distance of the magical cloud barrier.
Have you noticed that every day there seem to be fewer and fewer ponies about on the streets?
Incendia asked.
It's bizarre. I wonder what's going...
Her words were cut off by a sudden blast of sound and hot air. The concussive wave broke over them, blowing clouds at them like a heavy fog and obscuring their vision. Before any of them could react beyond a gasp, however, the clouds suddenly rushed back into the cloud wall as if pulled by a powerful vacuum. As if pulled away, Jigsaw began to make out shapes on the path that had not been there before. Several ponies were lying, splayed on the path ahead of them, as if they had been suddenly deposited there. They were all dressed in the dark blue capes of the temple guards, though most looked as though they had been torn to shreds. Several of the ponies had bright scarlet burns on their coats, and one was lying in a pool of rapidly increasing blood.
By the goddesses, what was that?
Incendia said.
My ears are still ringing. It sounded like something exploded.
Jigsaw opened his mouth to reply, but closed it suddenly when he noticed that one of the ponies, the one lying in a pool of blood, had a quail and inkwell as a cutie mark. Tiptoe and Jigsaw spoke at the same time, having evidently noticed the same thing. Is that Quill Dipper? They rushed over to the unicorn and tried to get a closer look at his face. Jigsaw's stomach clenched. It was Quill Dipper, and the blood was coming from a gash on the side of his face, running from his right ear, across his eye, and through to the tip of his nose. Blood gushed out in pulses.
Is he breathing?
Tiptoe asked in hushed tones. Jigsaw leaned down and put his face near Quill Dipper's. Yeah, but it's very shallow. I'm going to do what I can. Jigsaw's horn ignited, and he waved the tip over the cut. The wound glowed for a moment, and the blood lessened from a torrent to a trickle. That's all I can do, I'm afraid, Jigsaw said. I still haven't recovered fully from last time. One of the ponies who wasn't bleeding began to stir, groaning and grunting with pain. Jigsaw and Incendia rushed over to help him. Are you injured? Jigsaw asked, eyeing the large burn on the earth pony's flank. Nothing I can't deal with, the pony replied. Then do you mind if we ask a few questions? Jigsaw said, his tone shifting from one of care to cold determination. You're refugees, right? The injured pony asked. We're not supposed to tell refugees about it. It's... He trailed off upon seeing the look on Jigsaw's eyes. That pony on the ground over there is a friend, and I think we deserve to not be kept in the dark. You can either tell us, or we're going to find out for ourselves. The earth pony looked for a moment as if he was going to resist, but his resolve faded. Follow me, he said, taking a few shaky steps towards the cloud barrier.
Wait!
Tiptoe called.
What about Quill Dipper and the others?
The earth pony blinked, as if surprised to find that there were other ponies there, then slowly backed into the barrier. Without warning, it surged forward, engulfing them once more. When it contracted, the other ponies were gone. Even the blood had vanished. The tile looked as though it had been scoured clean.
Where did they go?
Tiptoe inquired. Somewhere safe, replied the earth pony. Soon Jigsaw, Tiptoe, and Incendia were making their way through the layer of cloud. It felt strangely different from when they had entered Totemhoof. The fog seemed like a steam in a sauna, hot almost to the point of being uncomfortable. It seemed to try to buffet them too, pulling them to one side or pushing them the other. As they walked, Jigsaw had to fight the urge to veer off to the left or right and continue following the burned pony. After several minutes, however, they emerged from the cloud barrier. What they saw was something far worse than any of them ever anticipated. They were standing at the foot of the huge hill that surrounded the valley that contained Totemhoof, and before them stretched out a battlefield. The sound was nearly deafening. Explosions could be seen off in the distance every few seconds, rocking ground with each blast. Pegasi swooped back and forth through the air, piling cloud onto the cloud barrier. Jigsaw couldn't help but notice they were all dressed in the blue robes of the temple guards. The ground directly in front of them was filled with tents and camps. Earth ponies and unicorns rushed around, moving equipment or soldiers.
What's going on?
Asked Incendia, her eyes wide.
What is this place?
We're fighting a war. Let's get into a tent, then I can explain everything to you. We're not safe out here. A moment later, the four of them were huddled inside a pure white tent, which had been erected directly in front of the cloud barrier. The earth pony stumbled over to a wooden cabinet in the corner of the tent, opened the doors with his teeth, and grabbed a tube of salve, which he squeezed onto the burn on his flank. We've been fighting a war. That's why so many houses are deserted, and why we've been willing to take in refugees, he said. He spoke quickly, pausing only to take breath, as though he'd been waiting a long time to say these words. It all started just a few days ago. We've always been prepared, of course, just in case some pony tried to invade, but they came so suddenly. Followers of Tantalus, you know.
What?
Jigsaw sputtered. The earth pony ignored him and continued. They just came and didn't stop. At first, we just let the cloud barrier do its thing, but after a while it started to get thinner and thinner. We realized that they were degrading it somehow. So we launched a counterattack, but they're crazy. They're not even ponies, some of them. I didn't even know griffins were still around until they started attacking. But they just keep throwing themselves at us. I don't know how they do it, but they never seem to get smaller in number, even though they're dying by the hundreds. Well, it worked, I suppose, because they managed to diminish our numbers so much that we were worried about sustaining our population. Almost all the Pegasi had been assigned to keeping the cloud barrier functional, and the rest of us are out fighting on the front lines. After we figured out that the refugees didn't like Tantalus any more than we do, we decided to let them in, but Moonbow himself stepped in at the last minute and barred anyone from telling them about the war until they were ready. It makes sense when you think about it, I suppose. They came from a city that was destroyed into one that was about to be if we didn't win. How's that for unlucky? The trio simply sat for several moments, not sure how to react to the information so unceremoniously dumped into their laps. It was Incendia who spoke first.
You lied to them?
She demanded, advancing towards the earth pony, who suddenly looked as though he regretted telling her that bit of news.
You lied to my people? Made them think they had finally found a safe home?
Incendia, Tiptoe said softly.
It wasn't his fault.
Incendia wasn't listening. The earth pony was now at the edge of the tent, unable to back up farther, and Incendia was still advancing.
Do you have any idea of what we've been through? What most of our lives were in Stalingrad?
As she spoke, her horn began to glow, and flames began to form on her coat. She was within inches of the earth pony, who now looked abjectly horrified. Tiptoe lunged forward as if to make a motion to stop her, but Incendia merely stamped her hoof and turned away from the earth pony. The flames on her coat slowly ebbed and died.
I'm sorry about that,
Tiptoe said to the earth pony, who was still eyeing Incendia wearily. I understand, he said, but please remember, I'm just a hoof soldier. I didn't choose to do this, and I haven't been able to talk about it with anyone since. I'll wait near the mouth of the tent, Incendia said. I need some air. She trumped off, looking disgruntled. I'm sorry about that, Jigsaw said apologetically as the earth pony stepped away from the canvas wall of the tent, still looking unnerved. I'd like to ask you a few questions. Like what? The soldier replied. Like what exactly does the cloud barrier do? It keeps the city safe. Anything that enters the clouds that isn't a resident of Totemhoof or possessing permission of a citizen to enter won't be able to. They'll just get turned around and come out the other side of the valley or right back out where they entered. Sometimes they even come out at the top of the clouds. We don't know how it was made, but it's the only thing that's kept us safe from marauders since the founding of the city. Radio Tower is kinda like that too, same principle. The Earth Pony stammered. What about what you did with the Cloud and Quail Dipper? That's another thing citizens can do, if we need to. It's a defense mechanism. We can use the clouds to transport injured ponies to a healer. Any pony can do it if they can get in the clouds. What do you mean by followers of Tantalus? Who are they? You never heard of them back in Stalingrad? No, Jigsaw said quickly. They didn't freely release information about that back there. Okay. Well, they're nasty characters. You should consider yourself lucky for having not heard about them. We don't know much about them other than they follow Tantalus. They don't seem to have any kind of organization and they don't stop coming ever. They just throw themselves at us, never dispose of their dead. Near as we can tell, they don't even treat their wounded. They just let them rot where they fall. And the unicorns use some of the worst magic I've ever seen. Huge fireballs, ponies turned inside out, the works. They don't look quite right either. Like the Walking Dead, they are. Not dead, though. Die as easy as anything else. More like they just went crazy and don't care about anything anymore. How did you end up getting blasted through the cloud layer? Jigsaw asked. Some kind of explosive. They lobbed at us. We were standing near the clouds at the time and the blast knocked us through them. I need to see the battle for myself, Jigsaw said. Don't know why you'd want to see that, the Earth Pony replied. But okay, there's some binoculars in the cabinet. Jigsaw levitated the binoculars out of the cabinet and all three of them left the tent. Incendia was standing just outside, staring out at the distant battlefield. Jigsaw lifted the binoculars and looked out at the spot where Incendia appeared to be looking. The battle was too hectic and fast-paced for him to make out much of anything, but he saw a few strange dark shapes, griffins perhaps, darting to and fro in the air, and strange green fires that charred the earth beneath. A mass of blue, presumably the temple guards, stood facing away from Totemhoof, forming a defensive wall which was hurling what looked like spears at the disorganized mass behind it. Jigsaw passed the binoculars to Incendia and Tiptoe in turn, each surveying the battle playing out so far away. When they had looked their fill, Incendia turned to the Earth Pony. How long did you say this battle has been going on for? This is the 4th day of fighting, I think, the Earth Pony replied plaintively. It's hard to tell when you don't have the lights of the city to tell the days apart. You set all of this up in 4 days? Incendia said incredulously. Like I said, we're always prepared for invasions. They just usually aren't of this magnitude. We've never lost so many before. What do we do now? Tiptoe whispered to Jigsaw. The plan isn't changed. We still need to get to the fragment. There's nothing we can do about this. But Jigsaw, Tiptoe whispered back insistently. If we take the fragment, then the clouds will probably dissipate. We can't risk that knowing what we do now. We'll discuss it when we get there. Either way, we still need to get down there to check out the airship. It looked like we might be able to get it working again or at the very least get some useful things to scavenge. Jigsaw spoke, his words sounding hollow and monotonous. Are you okay? Tiptoe said, her throat constricting slightly with worry. Jigsaw blinked. Yeah, I'm okay. It's a lot to take in at once. My mind is reeling. I understand what you mean, Incendia said, joining the whispered conversation. This is exactly what I was hoping wouldn't happen. Should we get going? Tiptoe asked the group. I don't see much point in sticking around. Agreed. Jigsaw and Incendia said in unison. Excuse me, Jigsaw called to the earth pony soldier, who was so intent on watching the far-off battle that he had apparently not noticed they had stopped. Can we get back through the cloud layer since we're not technically citizens? The earth pony mumbled, still intent on watching the battle. Then he seemed to process that some pony had spoken to him. Oh yes, you should be fine. Giving you a house was implicit permission, I should think. Could you give us permission, just in case? Jigsaw asked. I don't want to stumble out above the clouds. Only one of us has wings. Yeah, sure. Springseed gave you permission to enter and leave Totemhoof as you see fit, he said, though he still hadn't taken his eyes off the battlefield. Well, we should be good to go now, then, Jigsaw said, turning back towards the group. Goodbye, said the earth pony dreamily, and good luck, whatever it is you're trying to do.
I think he got a blow to the head in the blast,
Jigsaw hissed to Tiptoe, who had to repress a snort of laughter. They made their way through the cloud layer, once again fighting the compulsion to drift one way or the other, before finally emerging back onto the tiled pathway.